Hi guys, Sarah here. I hope you're all doing well. In today's video, I'm really excited to be setting up a new watercolour palette using only single pigment granulating watercolours. I'll show you my selection process, swatch out the colours I chose and talk a bit about why I decided to create this palette in the first place. I'll also be trying to mix a few of my favourite Schmincke supergranulation colours as well as experimenting with creating my own. So if this is something you've ever thought of doing, make sure you watch till the end of the video to see how I got on. So I got the idea for this palette after unboxing and swatching Schmincke's new supergranulation Volcano set, and I'll leave a link to that video in the card above if you haven't seen it. Unlike any of their other sets, the Volcano set contains two single pigment colours, Volcano Yellow PY119 and Volcano Red PR108. And these two single pigment colours are used in combination with others across the rest of the Volcano, Desert and Shire sets. Now I've really been enjoying these supergranulation mixes, but if this is the way forward for future sets, to keep buying them even individually is going to get pretty costly. So I thought if I had a single pigment mixing palette, I could set it up once and have endless fun either trying to recreate Schmincke's mixes or coming up with my own unique mixes. So to start with, using a bit of what I knew and doing some research, I came up with a list of single pigment granulating watercolours. The only other criteria for inclusion to this palette was that the colours were lightfast, but I'll talk more about that later. I grouped the watercolours together by pigment, so all the PY or yellow colours together, the brown PBR pigments together, and so on. And you'll also see that I've included a few of Daniel Smith's Primatech colours on my list. You might think this is cheating, as technically they are natural pigments rather than being single pigment colours, but they do offer some beautiful granulation, and for the most part these are colours I already had that I wanted to get more use out of. It's not an exclusive list, but I tried to include a range of pigments across the colour spectrum, to give me as many mixing variations as possible. Then I pulled out all the colours I already had and ordered a few more to fill in the gaps. I will list all the colours I used both on screen when we swatch them out and down in the description box if you're interested in picking any of them up for yourselves. I do have an affiliate link to Jackson's art store, which means that I get a small commission if you place an order using it, at no extra cost to you. And it was partly this affiliate credit that enabled me to purchase these new watercolours, so I really appreciate all your support. The next thing to do was to arrange the watercolours how I wanted them in my palette, and pour them out. For this, I decided to first make some larger swatch cards so I could better see how the colours laid down and how transparent or opaque they were, and these will be a useful reference too. So this is what I came up with. I arranged them according to what pigment they contain rather than putting them in rainbow order, as it might make for easier mixing. So for example, the Potter's Pink and Ultramarine Pink contain red pigments, so I've put them with the other red pigments rather than the violet ones. I also tried to arrange them in ascending order of pigment number. It's a bit nerdy, but again I thought it might make things easier. All that's left to do now is to label the half pans and fill them up. You may have noticed that for the Volcano Yellow I decided to fill 2 half pans, as it's the only bright yellow in this palette and I think I'll use it a lot. I had a bit of trouble with this pigment separating from the binder when I first swatched it out, so I used a cocktail stick to try and mix it to a more uniform consistency. And once all the pans were filled, I left them to dry for a few days. I used my kneadable eraser to prop the lid open to minimise any dust or anything getting into the paint before it's dried. So now it's dry, we're ready to start swatching. I've made this little insert to fit in the palette and serve as a useful reference when I'm painting. With a quick spray of water to reactivate the paints, we're ready to go. I'll put all the pigment numbers on screen as I swatch and talk about them in groups so it doesn't take too long. So first up we have Buff Titanium by Daniel Smith. It's the only white pigment in my palette and it's opaque. It's great for mixing more pastel colours, and I'll show you a really lovely mix I came up with at the end of this video. Next we have our yellow pigments, our Volcano Yellow of course, and then two others, Roman Szmul's Transparent Oxide Yellow PY42 and Winsor & Newton's Magnesium Brown Pigment PY119. I did say that I only wanted to include lightfast pigments in this palette, and I'm currently doing my own lightfast test on Magnesium Brown as it's not rated by Winsor & Newton. I'll let you know the results after it's sat on the windowsill for a few months. Until then, I'll reserve this one for my sketchbook paintings. Next we have Daniel Smith's Quinacridone Burnt Orange, Pigment P048. I'm excited to have this one on my palette as despite having had it for a while now, I haven't had the chance to use it much yet. The red pigments are next, starting with Winsor & Newton's Caput Mortuum, Pigment PR101. This is a rich, dark, purpley red, but like I said earlier, I wanted to arrange the watercolours by pigment this time, instead of putting it with the violets or browns, as I've done in previous palettes. Moving on, we have Schmincke's single pigment Volcano Red, Pigment PR108, and Potter's Pink PR233. Potter's Pink is used in a lot of Schmincke's supergranulation colours, so I had to include this one in my palette. Last on this row is Roman Szmul's Ultramarine Pink, PR259. I've had this one a while now too, so I'm glad to be giving it a home at last. On to the second row and we have the browns, and there are quite a few of these as I struggled to narrow it down. Roman Szmul's Goethite I've included as it's a beautiful granulating colour. It's from their Earth range though, so like Daniel Smith's Primatex, doesn't have a pigment number. Next we have three PBR7 colours, Winsor & Newton's Raw Umber, Brown Ochre and Maroon Brown. Despite having the same pigment number, they are all quite different, which is why I chose to include them all. I also chose two PBR6 pigments for the same reason. Schmincke's Mars Brown, which is new to me, and Daniel Smith's Brown Iron Oxide. These two are followed by another Roman Szmul watercolour, the gorgeous Aquarius Brown, PBR11. Roman Szmul colours are only available in full pans at the moment, so they do take up a bit more room in your palette. But this one offers amazing granulation, so in my opinion is well worth it. Next we have Winsor & Newton's Indian Red, PBR25, which is one I've had in my drawer for absolutely ages. I'm not even sure if it's still available. It's a really stunning colour though, and will definitely get more use now it's in this palette. For this next brown, Pigment PBR33, I have Schmincke's Mahogany Brown. This is used a lot across their whole range of supergranulation mixes, and I used it to create a couple of new mixes of my own, which you'll get to see in a bit. The last watercolour on this row is Daniel Smith's Minnesota Pipestone Genuine. This is a Primatex colour and was recommended a while back by a subscriber. It's not as heavily granulating as some colours, but does offer a softer, more fleshy shade of brown when you dilute it. Now for the last of the browns, and this is Schmincke's Green Umber, which despite the name actually contains brown pigment PBR7, which is why I put it on this left hand side under the lighter brown pigments. Next to this is the first of two blacks on my palette. This is Schmincke's Hematite Black. However, it does contain PG17, which is a green pigment, so that's why I've put it here with the other greens. This is another new one, and I have a couple of my own mixes to share with you using this colour too. Onto the more obvious greens now, and the opaque oxide of chromium, also PG17 by Winsor & Newton. This is followed by two more of Schmincke's colours, Viridian PG18, Cobalt Green Pure PG19, and Daniel Smith's Rare Green Earth PG23. These are all new colours to me, and will give me a huge range of possibilities when I eventually get round to painting some landscapes. I also decided to include Daniel Smith's Jadeite Genuine because it's a beautiful granulating green that I already had. This is another Primatech colour. On to the last two greens now, and these are both by Winsor & Newton. So we have Cobalt Green Deep, PG26, and Cobalt Turquoise Light, PG50. Now before I move on to swatch out the violet colours, I have three blues on the end of this row here. First is Cerulean Blue, PB35 by Winsor & Newton. Another new one to me is this Cobalt Azure, PB35 by Schmincke. And here's Cobalt Green Turquoise, PB36. PB36 is used with black pigment PBK11 in Schmincke's Forest Blue, so we'll try and recreate that once I've done swatching. The rest of the blues in this palette I've grouped together on the bottom right, so we'll get to those in a bit. For now though, let's move on to the violets, starting with pigment PV14. We have Cobalt Violet by Winsor & Newton, and Cobalt Violet Deep by Daniel Smith. Ultramarine Violet PV15 is also a Daniel Smith watercolour. And look how beautiful Schmincke's Manganese Violet is. This is PV16. It's mixed with PBR33 in Schmincke's Galaxy Pink and with PG50 in Glacier Turquoise. The last of the violets is Schmincke's Cobalt Violet Hue, PV62. PV62 is mixed with Viridian, PG18, to make Schmincke's Deep Sea Indigo, and with PBR6 to make Galaxy Brown, among other things. So I think it will be really useful if I want to try and recreate any of those myself. Now for a pigment that features quite frequently across all of Schmincke's supergranulation colours. This is Pigment Black, PBK11. Here I have Schmincke's Mars Black, which has quite noticeable granulation. The next two colours are both by Daniel Smith. We have Sodalite Genuine and Mayenne Blue. The Mayenne Blue is the end of a 5mm tube that I wanted to get some last use out of. I think it's another one where its light fast has been questioned. So as with the Magnesium Brown, I'll have to conduct my own light fast test. Now we have Daniel Smith's Prussian Blue. This is described as being granulating, but it's not hugely obvious. So I know not every granulating paint granulates to the same degree, but I'm not convinced for this one, so let me know what you think. It's certainly a beautiful colour though, and there's nothing else quite like it on my palette. Now we're down to the last three, and no real surprises with these blues as they're all pretty well known for being granulating. So we have Cobalt Blue PB28, Ultramarine Blue PB29, and last of all Cobalt Blue Deep PB74. All three of these are used quite extensively in Schmincke's Ready Mix supergranulation colours, especially the Ultramarine Blue PB29. And I've got a few of my own mixes using this colour to share with you as well. So now we've swatched all the colours out, let's have some fun. Firstly, I wanted to see if I could recreate some of my favourite supergranulation colours and match them to the real thing. That, after all, was one of the reasons I put this palette together. So here I'm going to swatch Tundra Orange, Tundra Violet, Tundra Pink and Forest Blue from the first supergranulation palette I set up using Schmincke's ready mixed tube paints that I dried into half pans. Now let's try and recreate these same colours using this mixing palette. Tundra Orange contains 3 pigments. For the yellow pigment I used transparent Oxide Yellow, PY42, instead of the PY43. But I could have used goethite, as I've since learned that goethite is PY43. For the PBR7 I used raw umber. And then to complete the mix I added PR233, Potter's Pink. Tundra Violet contains 2 pigments, our ultramarine blue PB29 and a brown PBR6. I used Mars Brown for this and tried to match the colour on my palette with the Tundra Violet swatch on my paper. This one took a little bit longer to mix, but we'll see better how I did once the swatches are dry. Tundra Pink also contains PB29 along with PR233, our Potter's Pink, and I managed to mix this one quite quickly. The good thing about mixing the colours yourself is that you can vary the mix quite easily, either on your palette or on the damp paper. So the last colour I tried to match was Schmincke's Forest Blue. This contains 2 pigments, PB36, which is the Cobalt Green Turquoise, and PBK11, our black. We'll come back and check on them all at the end when they're dry, but I'm quite excited by how they're looking so far. So the last thing I wanted to do with this palette today is to show you a few of my own supergranulation mixes, and these were inspired by the colours of these beach pebbles. I haven't got names for them yet or anything, so maybe you can come up with some suggestions. For now I'm going to give you some relaxing music to listen to as I paint them, but I will put up the colours I used on screen and I'll come back at the end with some last thoughts. So here are the mixes all dry, and I've labelled them up so I can refer back to them later. Let me know which of these is your favourite, or if you've come up with any interesting mixes of your own, I'd love to hear about them too. I think these colours would work really well for a beach painting maybe, and I love the buff titanium and hematite black mix for painting sand or rocks. So I'm really happy with how this palette turned out, and I'm excited to start painting with it. I think the ready-made Schmincke colours are beautiful and very convenient, especially if you want consistency over a larger area. But I do think this palette will give me more flexibility and freedom. And I think, as these swatches show, it is possible to quite accurately mix Schmincke colours from separate pigments. That said, I'm not going to say that I'm never going to buy any more of Schmincke's supergranulation pigments, but I will be keeping an eye out for what they do next. I know this video has been a long one, but if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend, take care, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.